All right, number 23. This is a fun question. So it's saying every brick house on River Street has a front yard. So every brick house on River Street has a front yard. Most, remember, most is more than 50%. Most of the houses on River Street that have front yards also have 2 stories. Cool. So, all right, this is a conclusion indicator word, the most. So more than 50% of the brick houses on River Street have 2 stories. So first we have to ask ourselves, is this an argument or a set of facts? It's an argument, so we have to find our conclusion. Our conclusion is most of the brick houses on River Street have 2 stories. Is this a valid conclusion? So there's, go ahead and fast forward to whenever I get into the diagramming this out of why one of these answer choices is wrong. But for those of you that are even struggling to see the flaw here, I'm going to draw a little picture so that you can see why this is flawed. So we're saying every brick house on River Street has a front yard. So say this is River Street, and these are our brick houses. Well, these can be our brick houses, and all of them have front yards. And then let's say that all the other houses are wood houses, and maybe they all have front yards too. So essentially, when we say that most or more than 50% of the houses on River Street that have front yards also have 2 stories, we could be talking about all of the houses. We could be talking about this 50% here, or more than 50%, and not even be saying anything at all about the brick houses. Maybe none of the brick houses actually have front yards. Just every house does have a front yard, or sorry, not every brick house has 2 stories. Maybe none of them have 2 stories. Whereas maybe all the wood houses, since all the wood houses also have front yards, actually all the 2-story buildings are over here. So if you were to diagram this out, or for those of you that were struggling to decide between a couple of these answer choices, what we're saying here is that if every brick is over your brick house, that's sufficient for knowing that you have a front yard. And then we're saying for our second sentence that most of the houses on River Street that have front yards, so I'm just going to put like a most in front of this, so most that have a front yard also have 2 stories. So I'm just going to put a 2 stories. So our conclusion then is saying that most of the brick houses on River Street have 2 stories. So if you look here, you can see that we're trying to connect 2 variables that actually don't go together. We have the sufficient here, and knowing that you are a brick house is not sufficient for knowing that you're 2 stories. Think about the picture that I drew and why that's the case. I'm guessing a lot of people probably picked answer choice A for this if they got it wrong. So let's think about this. By that line of reasoning, we could conclude that most politicians have run for office. So our conclusion is, once again, the M represents most. Most politicians have run for office. So run for office. Since, so this now like look into what our premise is. Since all legislators are politicians, so if you are a legislator, you are a politician, and most legislators, so now we have most legislators have run for office. So do you see that how we our conclusion, we have the most in the sufficient, where in our example we don't have the most in the sufficient. We have the brick houses. So let's go ahead and look at the correct answer choice, which is D. By that line of reasoning, I'm going to change this to orange. By that line of reasoning, we can conclude that most legislators have never run for office. So we're saying that most legislators, so I'm going to put most legislators never run for office. So we said run for office, no. And that's our conclusion. So then let's look at what our premise is. Remember, since, after since always indicates a premise. So this is a premise. That's an important LSAT tip. Since most public servants have never run for office, so we're saying public servants have never run for office. And all legislators are public servants. So once again, what our problem is we're taking this legislator piece right here and saying that since all legislators are public servants, so legislators is what is intersufficient. Or you could switch this because remember, if you're not a public servant, that means that you can't be a legislator. Not. So once again, in this one, we're confusing and we're trying to connect that most statement with, we're taking it from the sufficient and trying to connect it to the necessary, which we can't do. We can't say because most public servants have never run for office, we can't then just say, oh, well, let's apply that most onto our other premise, which is the legislators, and say, well, that means that most legislators have also not run for office, which is the same as what we did up here with the houses. We said, hey, since all brick houses have a front yard and most front yards have a two-story, that must mean that most brick houses have a two-story. Well, we can't take this most statement and apply it to this other sufficient, because that just makes it invalid. So our answer choice is going to be D. I hope that this helps.